Hey there, I'm Jason, 32 years old, living in New York. But my heart has always been drawn to the eerie tales that linger in the shadows of small towns. Let me take you on a chilling journey to a place called Palmyra, where legends of werewolves whisper through the trees and haunt the dreams of its residents. It was a stormy night, the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. The wind howled like a lost soul, and dark clouds swirled ominously overhead. My friends and I, Mary, Tom, and Daniel, decided to spend the night at an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods of Palmyra. The locals warned us about the cursed forest, but the thrill of adventure outweighed the fear. As we approached the cabin, a strange chill filled the air. The trees seemed to lean closer, as if eavesdropping on our every word. It was just past sunset when we settled in, the fading light casting long shadows that danced around us. We laughed and shared ghost stories, but deep down, I could feel something sinister lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the woods, cutting through our laughter like a knife. It was a sound that sent shivers down my spine, a primal growl that felt too close for comfort. We fell silent, exchanging nervous glances. "Probably just a wolf," Tom said, trying to dismiss our fears. But I knew better. The stories of the Palmyra wolves were more than just folklore. They were warnings. "Did you hear that?" Mary whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Just then, the growling grew louder, closer. We could hear the snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves, and I felt an overwhelming urge to flee. But I couldn't let my fear show. We had come here to prove that we were brave, after all. I suggested we venture outside to see what was lurking in the darkness. As we stepped out of the cabin, the moonlight illuminated the clearing, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. The forest was alive with sounds, but nothing could prepare us for what we were about to encounter. Then out of the shadows, it appeared, a massive figure with glowing yellow eyes, its body covered in matted fur. It stood on two legs, towering over us, and I felt my heart race. "Is that a werewolf?" Daniel stammered, his voice barely a whisper. The creature let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the trees, and in that moment, we all knew we were facing something far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. "Run!" I shouted. But before we could react, the werewolf lunged at us. The primal instinct to survive kicked in, and we scattered into the woods, the darkness swallowing us whole. I could hear the sound of its heavy breathing, the pounding of its claws against the ground as it pursued us. We ran deeper into the forest, branches scratching at our faces, the underbrush grabbing at our legs. "Where do we go?" Mary screamed, panic rising in her voice. "We have to find a way out." But the more we ran, the more lost we felt. The forest was a maze, twisting and turning with no sign of the cabin. I could still hear the growls and the snapping of twigs behind us, and my heart raced as I wondered if we would ever escape. We stumbled upon a small clearing, the moon shining brightly above us. It was eerily calm, but I could feel the tension in the air. "We can't stay here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "We need to keep moving." Just then, we heard a rustling nearby, and we turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a man dressed in tattered clothes, his eyes wild with fear. "Help us!" I shouted. "There's a werewolf chasing us!" The man's gaze shifted, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not just a werewolf. It's a curse." "What do you mean?" Tom asked, fear creeping into his voice. The man took a step closer, glancing nervously around the clearing. "Palmyra is haunted by the spirits of those who were wronged. The werewolf is a guardian of the forest, a protector of the cursed. You must leave this place before it's too late." His words hung in the air, heavy with dread. "We can't just leave," Mary said, desperation in her voice. "We need to find a way to stop it." The man shook his head. "There is no stopping it. You must understand the legend. Every full moon, the curse awakens, and those who enter the forest are marked. You've already disturbed its slumber." Just then, a chilling howl erupted from the darkness, sending us all into a panic. The werewolf was close, too close. "We need to go now," Daniel shouted, pulling at my arm. As we turned to flee, the man grabbed my shoulder. "Listen to me. If you want to survive, find the ancient totem hidden deep within the woods. It holds the key to breaking the curse, but beware. The werewolf will do everything in its... Are you feeling the chill? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button if you want to hear more tales of terror. We ran deeper into the forest, the trees forming a thick, almost impenetrable wall around us. The man's words echoed in my mind. Find the ancient totem. But how are we supposed to locate something hidden for centuries in a place where every path seemed to lead us in circles? Tom, always the skeptic, was the first to break the silence. "Do you really think some ancient totem is going to stop this thing?" he panted, his voice strained with fear and exhaustion. "I don't know, Tom," I shot back. "But do you have a better plan?" Suddenly Mary tripped over a thick root, crashing to the ground with a yelp. We rushed to help her up, but as we did, the growling returned, louder than ever before. It was close, too close. I looked around, trying to find something, anything that could help. Then I spotted it. Amid the twisted branches and dead leaves, there was a faint glow. "Over there," I pointed toward the light. "Maybe it's the totem." Without hesitation, we sprinted toward the glow, hearts pounding, every step filled with the terror of what might be right behind us. As we approached, the light grew brighter, and there it was, an ancient stone figure, carved in the shape of a wolf, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. This had to be it. But as soon as we reached it, the ground beneath us seemed to shift. A cold wind swept through the clearing, and I could feel the air thickening, like the forest itself was alive, watching us. "Okay, now what?" Daniel asked, his voice shaky. I didn't know. The man hadn't told us what to do next. Was just finding the totem enough? Was it supposed to break the curse on its own? Before we could figure it out, the werewolf's howl echoed through the trees again, and this time, it was closer than ever. My heart raced as I turned to face the darkness. And then, it appeared. Emerging from the shadows, the creature stood on its hind legs, its massive frame towering above us. Its yellow eyes gleamed with a hunger I had never seen before, and its fangs glistened in the moonlight. We froze, fear gripping us like a vice. There was no escape this time. The werewolf snarled, baring its teeth, and in that moment, I realized that the totem might not be enough. We were out of options. Mary clutched my arm. "Jason, what do we do?" I stared at the werewolf, my mind racing. There had to be something we missed, something about the curse, the totem, the legend. And then it hit me. "The werewolf," I whispered. "It's not just protecting the forest, it's bound to it." Tom looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The curse," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It's keeping the werewolf trapped here. If we destroy the totem, maybe we can free it, break the curse for good. Or get ourselves killed in the process," Daniel muttered. But we had no other choice. The werewolf was advancing, its growls low and menacing. If we didn't act now, it was over. I grabbed a large branch from the ground and swung it at the totem with all my strength. The stone cracked, but it didn't break. The werewolf roared as if sensing what I was trying to do. "Help me!" I shouted. Tom and Daniel rushed forward, grabbing rocks and sticks, and together we pounded on the totem. With each hit, the werewolf grew more frenzied, its snarls turning into vicious howls. Finally, with one last swing, the totem shattered into pieces. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The werewolf stopped in its tracks, staring at us with those glowing yellow eyes. Then, to our horror, it let out the most blood-curdling scream I'd ever heard. A sound so primal, so full of pain, that it shook the very ground beneath us. The creature's body began to contort, its muscles spasming as if it was being ripped apart from the inside. We watched in shock as it fell to its knees, clutching its head, and then it stopped moving. Was it over? Had we done it? But before we could catch our breath, something even more terrifying happened. The werewolf's body began to change, its fur receding, its monstrous form shrinking. And then standing where the beast had been just moments ago was a man. He was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. But he was human. He looked up at us, his eyes filled with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. "You freed me," he whispered, his voice weak. I took a step forward, still in shock. "Who are you?" The man gave a sad smile. "I was the first, the one who brought the curse to Palmyra. I've been trapped here for centuries, forced to become that creature." For a moment, we didn't say anything. We were too shaken, too overwhelmed by what had just happened. But as the wind died down and the forest grew quiet once again, I realized that we had done it. We had broken the curse, or so I thought. Because as we turned to leave the clearing, I heard something, a low growl, barely audible, but unmistakable. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing once again. "Did you hear that?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my eyes scanning the darkness. The forest was alive with shadows, and suddenly I wasn't so sure that we were alone. The legend of the Palmyra wolves had been broken, but not everything stays dead. So what do you think? Was the curse really broken, or is there something even darker lurking in Palmyra's woods? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to smash that like button if you want to hear what happens next, because trust me, the terror is far from over. We stood frozen. They weren't human. "Run!" I shouted, not waiting for the others to react. We took off, our feet pounding against the forest floor, dodging roots and branches as we raced blindly through the trees. The sound of growls and snapping twigs followed us, getting louder and closer with every step. Whatever was out there, it was hunting us. I could hear Mary sobbing behind me, her breaths ragged and desperate. Daniel was shouting something, but the words were lost in the chaos. All I could focus on was putting one foot in front of the other, the primal need to survive overpowering everything else. But then in the middle of the frantic chase, I saw it again, a faint light flickering between the trees. It wasn't the totem this time. It was something else, something new. I veered toward it, hoping it would offer us some kind of safety. But as we got closer, the light grew brighter, more blinding, until we broke through the tree line and stumbled into an open clearing. In the center stood an old, decaying cabin. The light was coming from a lantern hanging on the porch, its flame flickering weakly in the night. Inside! Now!" I yelled, and we all rushed toward the cabin. Slamming the door behind us, we collapsed against the walls, gasping for breath. The cabin smelled of damp wood and rot, and the air was thick with dust. But at least we were safe, for now. "What the hell is going on?" Tom demanded, his voice shaking with panic. "Why is this happening?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. We weren't out of the woods yet, literally. The cabin creaked around us, old and unstable, like it hadn't been touched in decades. There were no windows, just wooden boards barely holding together. The growls outside grew fainter, but they were still there, lurking in the dark. Daniel slumped against the door, his face pale. "What do we do now?" Before I could respond, a new sound filled the room. Footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere within the cabin. We all froze, our eyes scanning the room. It was empty, just a single large space with an old fireplace, a few broken chairs, and a table covered in dust. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking right above us. "Is there a second floor?" Mary whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head. It doesn't look like it. But then the ceiling above us creaked, and I could see the dust fall from the beams. Someone was up there. Without thinking, I grabbed a rusted poker from beside the fireplace, gripping it tightly. "Stay here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was being quiet. Whatever was up there already knew we were here. I moved toward a narrow set of stairs at the back of the cabin, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to turn back, but something, curiosity, fear, drove me forward. At the top of the stairs, there was a small, dark hallway, barely wide enough to walk through. I could hear the footsteps now, closer, just around the corner. Holding my breath, I rounded the corner, poker raised, ready to defend myself against whatever was waiting for me. But the hallway was empty. Suddenly, a gust of cold air rushed past me, chilling me to the bone. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, a figure stood, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, its features hidden in the darkness, but I could see its eyes, those same glowing eyes that had been watching us in the forest. It wasn't human. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and the figure took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it was savoring my fear. "Jason," Mary's voice called from downstairs, snapping me back to reality. I turned and bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. "We need to get out of here," I gasped as I reached the others. "Now!" Tom looked at me, his face pale. "What did you see?" "There's something in here with us," I said, my voice shaking. "We're not safe." Before anyone could react, the cabin door burst open, and a powerful wind tore through the room, blowing out the lantern and plunging us into darkness. The growls returned, louder than ever, and the footsteps, they were coming down the stairs now. We were trapped. So here's the question for you. What would you do if you were in our shoes? Do you think we'll make it out of this alive? Or is this where our story ends? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're as hooked as we are, because the nightmare isn't over yet. The cabin shook violently as the wind howled through the open door, and the heavy footsteps descended the stairs, one slow, deliberate thud at a time. I could barely breathe, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just fear, it was primal terror, the kind that claws at your insides and makes you feel utterly helpless. Tom grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Jason, what do we do? We can't just sit here." I was about to respond when the growls outside intensified, as if whatever was in the forest had found its way closer, surrounding the cabin. We were trapped between two horrors, the one inside and the one out there. "Barricade the door!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "We need to hold them off." We rushed to the door, pushing an old table and some broken chairs against it. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that none of this mattered. Whatever was coming for us was stronger, faster, more relentless than we could possibly defend against. A sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Not a bang, not a slam, just a knock. We froze. For a moment, all the chaos stopped. The wind outside seemed to die down. The growls fell silent, and the heavy footsteps on the stairs ceased. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath. Then, a voice. Low, raspy, and in. I stared at the door, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that I was sure everyone could hear it. The voice wasn't right. It sounded distorted, like it was being spoken through clenched teeth, or a mouth that wasn't meant for human speech. Mary clutched my arm, her face pale. "Don't open it, Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't." As if I would. But something deep inside me, a curiosity, a pull, urged me to move closer. I shook it off, stepping back instead, trying to keep a clear head. The voice came again, louder this time. "Let me in." Suddenly the wind picked up again, rattling the walls of the cabin. The footsteps on the stairs resumed, this time faster, more frantic, as if whatever was up there was growing impatient. "Jason, we have to get out of here," Daniel shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. "We can't stay in this place." But there was nowhere to go. The cabin was a trap, and the forest outside was no safer. We were boxed in, with no way out. The door shook violently, as if something massive had thrown itself against it. The makeshift barricade held, but just barely. We could hear the growls again, louder and angrier, circling us like predators waiting for the kill. And then, just as quickly as it started, everything went silent again. We stood there, staring at the door, waiting for whatever was coming next. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Something, or someone, had kicked down a door above us. The footsteps thundered toward the stairs, moving faster than before, as if whatever was up there was done playing games. I grabbed the poker again, holding it out in front of me like it would actually do anything against whatever was coming. The others were frozen, their eyes wide with terror. Then out of nowhere, the cabin filled with a deafening howl, a sound so full of rage and hunger that it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the werewolf, no doubt about it. But this howl wasn't like before. It was closer, much closer. "Upstairs!" Mary screamed, pointing toward the staircase. We turned just in time to see it. The figure from earlier. It wasn't human. It was hunched over, its body grotesque and twisted, covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its mouth was twisted into a snarl, showing rows of jagged, blood-stained teeth. It was the werewolf. Before we could react, it lunged toward us, moving faster than anything I had ever seen. We barely had time to scatter as it crashed into the wall, splintering wood and sending dust flying everywhere. "Run!" I shouted, though I wasn't sure where we could possibly go. Tom, Daniel, and Mary bolted toward the back of the cabin, but there was no back door, no exit. We were cornered. The werewolf snarled, shaking off the impact and turning toward us again, its eyes locking onto me. There was something almost intelligent in its gaze, something human. But whatever humanity had once existed in it was long gone. I raised the poker, but I knew it was pointless. This thing, this monster, was unstoppable. Just as it prepared to pounce again, There was another loud bang, this time from the door. The wood splintered and the barricade we had thrown together began to give way. Whatever was outside wanted in. And it was coming fast. I had to think fast. "We need to distract it," I yelled, trying to come up with a plan. Tom grabbed a broken chair leg and threw it at the werewolf. But it barely flinched. It was fixated on us, its muscles coiled, ready to strike. And then just as it leapt, the door burst open, and a flood of cold air rushed in. But it wasn't the wind that made us gasp in shock. Standing in the doorway was another figure, a man, tall and gaunt, with eyes just like the werewolf's. His face was pale, his skin stretched tight over sharp features, and his clothes were torn and stained with what looked like dried blood. For a split second, I thought we were facing another monster. But then the man spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "I've been hunting it for years," he said, stepping into the cabin, "and I'm not leaving without it." The werewolf growled, backing away slightly, its eyes shifting between us and the man. This was a standoff, and we were right in the middle of it. The tension in the room was thick, the air so still that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The hunter stood tall, unwavering, while the werewolf's growls filled the small cabin, reverberating off the walls like an ominous echo. The hunter took another step forward, his eyes never leaving the werewolf. "It's time," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "This ends now." The werewolf snarled, but there was hesitation in its movements, a brief moment of uncertainty. It sensed something dangerous in the hunters. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone to run, but we were frozen, transfixed by the scene unfolding in front of us. This was no longer just a monster on a rampage. It was a deadly battle, one that felt ancient, as if it had been written in fate long before we ever got involved. Then, without warning, the werewolf lunged at the hunter, its claws flashing through the air with lethal speed. But the hunter was faster. With a fluid motion, he dodged the attack and produced a weapon from beneath his coat, a long silver knife that gleamed in the dim light of the cabin. Silver, the one thing that could kill a werewolf. The werewolf howled in fury, realizing too late what it was up against. It swiped again, more vicious this time, but the hunter met it head-on, driving the blade deep into the creature's side. A sickening howl filled the room, louder than anything I had ever heard before. The sound was so piercing, it felt like the walls themselves would shatter. The werewolf staggered back, its blood dripping onto the floor, each drop sizzling as it hit the wooden planks. But it wasn't done yet. With a desperate fury, it lunged again, using the last of its strength to try and take the hunter down with it. But the hunter was relentless. He dodged again, and this time he slashed the silver knife across the werewolf's throat in a swift, final strike. The beast collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as blood pooled around it. Its body twitched, the monstrous form writhing as if trying to fight death itself. But after a few agonizing moments, it went still. The werewolf was dead. For a moment, none of us moved. We just stood there, staring at the massive creature lying lifeless on the cabin floor. It was over. The terror that had been hunting us, the thing that had stalked us through the woods, was finally gone. But as I watched the hunter stand over the body, something unsettling stirred in my gut. The way he looked at the werewolf, it wasn't relief or satisfaction. It was emptiness, as if this was just another job for him, another night. He wiped the blood from his blade, his face unreadable. "I told you," he muttered. "I've been hunting it for years." Tom, barely able to speak, finally asked the question we were all thinking. What are you?" The hunter looked at us, his cold eyes meeting mine, and then he did something I hadn't expected. He smiled. "I'm not like you," he said simply. "But I'm not like it either." Before we could say anything else, the hunter turned on his heel and walked out of the cabin, disappearing into the night as if he had never been there. I stood frozen in place, my heart hammering in my chest as Mary's transformed face glared back at me. The familiar features of the friend I had once known were gone, replaced by a grotesque, nightmarish creature. I couldn't believe this was real, couldn't believe that in just a matter of days, Mary had turned into the very thing we feared most. "Mary," I whispered, my voice trembling. But the creature in front of me didn't respond to the name. It snarled, saliva dripping from its sharp, elongated teeth as its glowing eyes fixed on me with predatory intent. I backed away slowly, hoping to escape before it, lunged. But as I reached for the door, Mary pounced. Her claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing me as I threw myself out of the room and slammed the door shut behind me. My breathing was ragged, panic coursing through my veins. I had to think, had to figure out what to do. She was turning into one of them. I ran to the others, waking them up in a frenzy. Tom and Jen were bleary-eyed, but they understood immediately when they saw the terror in my face. "Mary, she's changing," I gasped. "She's one of them now." Tom cursed under his breath. "We should have known this would happen," Jen screamed as Mary turned her attention to us, her eyes glowing with hunger. I grabbed a wooden chair and swung it at her, desperate to keep her away. It shattered on impact, but it barely slowed her down. "Get out of here!" I yelled at Jen, trying to buy us some time. She hesitated, but then turned and ran, disappearing down the hallway. Mary snarled and came at me again, but this time I was ready. I dodged her claws, grabbing a metal rod from the floor and swinging it with all my strength. It connected with her side, sending her staggering back, but it wasn't enough to stop her. She came at me again, and I knew this would be the end. I nodded numbly. Together we carried Mary's body outside and buried her next to the werewolf we had killed earlier. It felt wrong, so wrong, to lay her to rest in that cursed ground. But there was no other choice. As we finished, I looked out into the woods. The trees